distracted people, right? People very distracted from serving God, right? I mean, these are not necessarily all bad things, right? I mean, we got jobs, we got homes, kids, grandkids, right? Don't get me started. Okay? But all these things are important. If they weren't important, God wouldn't have given them to us, right? He gave them to us and expected us to appreciate them, take care of them, and through them, shine our light to the world, right? Because he put us here. Well, that's what he did for all of his people. And has done that since the beginning of time. It's never changed. God's got a program and a plan for all of us, right? Whether we like it or not, whether we like the back pains or the arthritis or the cancer or the kidney stones. It's all about just living, right? Living through this life, shining a light for him, right? So I hope that someday we'll be with him. Nancy, are you mad at me today or Jim? Oh, okay. Just want to make sure I didn't start an argument between you two today. Okay. Last several weeks, though, actually, just historically speaking, we've talked about, we've been focusing on Judah. Judah, right? The southern kingdom, right? Of the Israelite nation. That's separated from the northern kingdom. And we've got, and they've had king after king after king. I mean, since they separated kingdoms, they had 20 kings, all right? Some of them were good kings, some of them were bad kings. When I say good or bad, I don't necessarily mean they were good politicians. They were good or bad representations of God's leaders, right? Because they actually were selected to be God's king of God's people that they thought they really had to have. Right? Because judges weren't good enough. Well, they've had and have had up until today's lesson, right? 20 kings. Of the last 6 or 7, right? Only 2 of them have been what we might refer to as godly kings, meaning referring or reverencing, maybe is the right word, reverencing God. Wouldn't it be great if everyone had the same focus, right? Would it be a friendly place? It doesn't mean we wouldn't still go to work. It doesn't mean we still wouldn't have kids, backaches, kidney stones, and all that good stuff, right? Along the way, right, we've got a helper, and that's God. And we're going to talk about that today. So anyway, primary focus of today's lesson is the fall of Jerusalem. Everyone here, if anyone has never heard of Jerusalem in here, raise your hand. Even in today's world, right? Jerusalem. It's sort of the capital of chaos, is it not? Even on the news, right? In the Middle East, everything that's happening crazy is happening probably over there, right? But Jerusalem, back in the Old Testament, was God's city, God's place, where his people dwelled. Within a city that years ago, now we're talking years before Jesus, right? 900 some years before Jesus. The walls of Jerusalem were built. It was like a fort. It was raised up on high ground, in a very special place. I mean, if you looked at the city of Jerusalem, the west, south, and east sides were valleys, right? So that if you were in an army and wanted to attack it, right, you'd be against your better judgment to do that, right? And they had walls around it. So people just didn't come up and just walk in, right, without having access or the secret password, right, to get in. This is a long time ago, right? What's today, 2025? This is 2025 years after or so Christ was born. We're talking 1,000 years before. God still was there, still playing an important role in his people. Now, the northern part of Jerusalem was kind of on a hill going down into the city. So if you were going to attack Jerusalem, if you were back in the Old Testament, you were going to attack the city of Jerusalem. Matter of fact, even today, right? You'd want to come in from the north side, right? Momentum would be downhill, right? With all your raging horses and camels and goats, and etc. Whatever you want to use to attack the city. But anyway, just to give you an idea of the city of Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem, by the end of today's lesson, will not exist. God has warned them all along the path of Jeremiah over the last 5 kings. He said, you better change your ways or God's going to fix you. He's going to destroy your city. He's going to destroy your temple. Remember, there was just one right there. There wasn't one on every corner. You didn't say, well, I'll just go over to Centerburg, go to church. Right? They have one temple. By the end of today's lesson, God will destroy. He will allow the Babylonians to destroy the city. Burn the temple, burn the palaces, burn the houses, okay? You know how they did on the old westerns? I won't mention any names, right? The Apaches would come in and they'd burn out the houses, or even the Civil War, right? They didn't leave anything to stand. That's what's going to happen, right, to Jerusalem. It's been warned, it's been told, and the kings, the remaining kings, were not obedient to God in their service to Him. Now, let me just quickly. Yeah. Bingo. Yeah, and we'll read that today. Specifically, that is how ultimately that the Babylonians, now for those who don't know, anybody ever hear of Babylon? Saddam Hussein? That's actually modern history, right? But that's the part of the world from where the Babylonians came. Down over in the Mesopotamia and the Tigris River valleys, right? In eastern Iraq, southeastern Iraq. That's where the Babylonians come from, into the Promised Land. So we had a few good kings. We had the old King Hezekiah. Remember, he was the one that was going to die, but he was a faithful, good king. He prayed, and God blessed him with more years, right? Well, son of a gun, old King Hezekiah, he eventually died, just like we're going to do, and guess what? He had a son. His son's name was Manasseh. Manasseh ruined things. Everything his dad did to get this nation's feet on the ground towards serving God, Manasseh purposely dedicated his life and ministry to destroying it, right? He brought in pagan gods, pagan worship of things outside the scope of what God had in his plan for his people. Manasseh had a boy, Ammon. He didn't last very long, right? For a couple years. And then he had a son who had a son. And along came Josiah. And Josiah was a good king. Okay? One out of the last 4, like his great-great-great-granddad was. Josiah was a good king. Lived a good spiritual life. Dedicated to serving God. And guess what? He died. And then the spiritual direction and leadership of the people, God's people, were left in the hands of his 3 sons and 1 grandson. And let me tell you, none of them were worth a nickel. Okay? None of them. What's even more interesting is these guys, I call them boys. You know how old they were? Young. Get this. I wrote this down because I just couldn't believe it. These are the men that took over the leadership of God's people in Judah. All right? Josiah's first son, he was 23. Okay? Now, I was married at 23. I didn't have any kids yet. Not sure I should have. I didn't. His brother Jehoiakim was 25. He must have been one of the old cats, right? He didn't last very long, and then his son took over, and he was just 18. Now, these are people that were put in place to lead God's people. It didn't work out for him either. Then his last son was Zedekiah. Zedekiah was the last king of God's people, of Judah, okay? Zedekiah was 21 years old. 21 years old. I mean, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a psychologist, but they say, at least according to my lesson plan, I didn't know this, they say probably not until you're about 25 that you probably reach the point where you should probably be making those type of decisions. These guys were just kids, right? Big kids taking on the leadership of God's people. It ain't no wonder they didn't make mistakes, right? I don't know where you were at 21, but if you roll back the clock and think about your maturity in the Lord, I don't know where it was at. But these guys were apparently not where they needed to be at this point in time. So Zedekiah, interestingly speaking, is again part of the focus of today's lesson, because it was through him or by his leadership that the Babylonians wiped out Jerusalem people. Matter of fact, Zedekiah, remember that name? Zedekiah was actually put into place, in his position as the king of these people by who? Babylon. You know, you've got this spiritual world, right? These people being referred to as God's people. And you've got Egypt on the west, and you've got Babylon Egypt to the west, Babylon on the east. You've got Assyria on the northeast, Syria on the north, and all they do is fight. That's not any different than it is today, is it? If you look at the news, there's constantly a battle going on over there by somebody. And it just so happens that the promised land is right in the middle of it, right? So every time they have a battle with anybody, they got to go almost over top of the promised land to get there, because, you know, they don't go through the desert to get there. They got to go up and around, just like Abraham did when he traveled to the promised land. Somewhere it was safe to travel. Well, anyway, Babylon had already made their presence known. Egypt had made theirs known. Babylon had made theirs known. And when Babylon basically exiled Zedekiah's brother, they put Zedekiah in place. So Zedekiah is what they refer to as an apostate. Okay, anybody know what an apostle is? Anybody got an idea of what an apostle is? Okay. Zedekiah was an apostate. Right? Left, right. It means he didn't give a hoot about anybody or anything. He didn't care about religion. He didn't care about Babylonia, who put him in place as king. He didn't care about his people. He just cared about being king. Okay? So Zedekiah is the king. He's been placed there in position by the Babylonians. Now, the Babylonians have already, at this point in time, come in and taken a lot of what they wanted out of the promised land. I mean, it's full of gold. Remember, we've been reading about the temple and, right? Ark of the Covenant over the last several weeks. Zedekiah. Last week in our lesson, we talked just briefly for a few minutes about Jeremiah. And if you remember, Jeremiah's princes threw Jeremiah into what? A cistern full of miry clay to die with nothing to eat. Okay? Jeremiah's eunuch, he went over to the king Zedekiah and said, don't you know it's bad what you did to Jeremiah? And the king said, given the fact that I have now a crowd of people surrounding me, I don't think that'd be a good idea to agree with that. So why don't you just go take 30 men and get him out of there? So they go get Jeremiah out of there. This is during the reign of Zedekiah. Okay? Let's begin reading a little bit about Zedekiah. I'm going to read some, so just bear with me. If you don't like to hear it, you can probably follow me in chapter 24 of 2 Kings. That is, if you don't know where that's at, it's somewhere after Samuel, after Judges, after Joshua, right? So it's very early in the Old Testament. I'm going to read. Chapter 24. Verse 8 says, I don't even know how to say these names. Jehoiachin, okay? This is Zedekiah's nephew. The one that was king before him. He was 18 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. And his mother's name was Nehushta, the daughter of Elnathan of Jerusalem. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that his father had done. Remember, his father was Jehoiakim, another one of Josiah's sons. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon came up against Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. Okay, this is before Zedekiah. Babylon comes in already into the promised land. Besieges Jerusalem. Means what? Essentially attacks. They make their presence well known. Okay? Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came against the city, and his servants did besiege it. And Jehoiachin, king of Judah, went out to the king of Babylon. He and his mother and his servants and his princes and his officers and the king of Babylon took him in the 8th year of his reign. All right? This is Zedekiah's nephew, the one who was king before him. Babylon comes in to make their presence known again. This guy, right, rejects it. And he's taken in exile back to Babylon. And he carried out thence all the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king's house, and cut in pieces all the vessels of gold which Solomon, king of Israel, had made in the temple of the Lord, as the Lord had said. Okay, so what is he saying? First trip in, Babylon says, I'm going to take you exile, and I'm going to take all your goods with me back to Babylon. And he carried away all Jerusalem, get this, and all the princes, and all the mighty men of valor, even 10,000 captives. Okay, 10,000. This isn't just a family. A whole bunch. And all the craftsmen and smiths said none remained save the poorest of the people of the land. So if you knew how to do anything and you were going to benefit the empire of Babylon, we're taking you back out of Jerusalem, and we're going to leave all the poor people here. Poor people is like me. They don't have anything. any skills anybody'd want, right? They just leave me here, which I'd be happy about that. And he carried away Jehoiachin to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land, and those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And all the men of might, even 7,000. And craftsmen and smiths 1,000, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. So, we talk about Babylon taking the Jerusalem city. It wasn't in one blast. There were 3 different times that they did this. Let's continue and talk about Zedekiah. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. So guess what? Zedekiah's real name was Mattaniah. Babylon put him in. We'll just say, well, we just kicked our tails, took everything they owned, just left the poor people there, and we're going to leave him a king, and we're going to call him Zedekiah. That Zedekiah is the 3rd son of Josiah. Okay? Here he is. Now, you wonder why he's not a good king. He's probably just mad, right? You can't hardly take everything for granted. But Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign. And he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Hamutal, and the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. This is not Jeremiah the prophet. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. And that's his brother. Okay? So basically, how the Bible a lot of times says he did that his fathers did. Well, he did that his brother did. He was just a bad king, spiritually speaking. Okay? For through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem, Judah, till he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. Okay? So Babylon puts him in place, in charge of this land of poor people. Right? Zedekiah becomes an apostate. Right? He doesn't care about them. He doesn't care about Babylon. He cares about nothing but fulfilling his role that he's been given. It's keeping him alive. Okay? Here we go. It came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month. So you know what that day is? I don't either. Just long time afterwards, right? 9 years into his reign. So Zedekiah has been king. So how old was he now? 21 plus 9. He was 30 years old, okay? Still a youngster, in my opinion. I mean, how many presidents do we have today that are running this country that are 30 years old? Not many, right? I don't know how many we'd elect, but this guy here was put in place by Nebuchadnezzar. In the 10th month, in the 10th day of the month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came. Guess what that means? Here they come. They're coming back from Babylon to Judah. Not only Judah, but to Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem. The walled city of Jerusalem. He hadn't torn down the walls yet, okay? Came and all his host against Jerusalem, pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. What's up with that? The city of Jerusalem, being a walled city, Babylon came in and they just pitched their tents all around the city. I guess anywhere it could stand up. Angel and I were talking the other day. I forget where we were at. I said, man, this place is just like down home. You build a house on a rock. They're all like, if you jumped off the back porch, you'd roll down the hill, right? Anywhere they could pitch a tent, their armies came. They surrounded the city of Jerusalem, and they besieged it, okay? This was in the 9th year of Zedekiah's rule. And for 2.5 years, they stayed there. And you know what they do when they stayed there? Starved them to death. They said, we know who comes, we know who goes. We know where their food is, and we know where they get it. And they're not going to get it. So for 2.5 years, they surrounded the city of Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem, we know, based on our story last week, might have some water inside. They might have some wells. They might have some cisterns that people could get maybe a little water for some time. But you know how droughts are. They come just like, say, last August, and things just stop raining, and they stop getting rain, and the wells go dry, and the food runs out. They begin to go into starvation within the city of Jerusalem. And Babylon did this by hanging out, camping out around the city. And the city was besieged. This is verse 2 of chapter 25. The city was besieged unto the 11th year. That's the 2.5 years I was telling you about. And on the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine prevailed in the city. There was no bread for the people of the land. They ran out of food. Now, just because you were Jewish, doesn't mean you lived inside the city walls, right? Just because your address is Cinnaburg doesn't mean you live in the city of Cinnaburg, right? You could be on the outside. So there were probably some survivors, not the meat. But verse 4 says, and the city was broken up. Okay, the city of Jerusalem was broken up. That means what? Torn apart. Okay? Meaning they went within the city. The city was broken up, and all the men of war, what happened? They got the heck out of there, right? First of all, the Babylonians are good at a few things. One of them is war. They were good at killing people. That's why they're the empire, right? When they got in the city, the men of the city, the Jews, they said, I am out of here. Okay? The men of war fled by night. This is verse 4. By the ways of the gate between what? Between two walls. They found a gate. Wherever it was, they went out, which is by the king's garden. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about. These are the Babylonians. Okay? And the king went the way toward the plain. The plain. Now remember I was just mentioning this earlier about how Jerusalem sets, if I was facing south, then there'd be a valley or a valley on the east or the west. Zedekiah snuck out down on the southeast side and headed towards the river Jordan. I guess he assumed that they wouldn't find him, right? Because they typically would be more offensive on the northern side. Well, things didn't work out for Zedekiah. The king went the way toward the plain, and the army of the Chaldees, they pursued after the king. They probably have a guy like Festus, who is a good tracker. He could smell the king and all that probably perfume he wore, because he probably didn't smell like the guys that were hoeing corn. Okay? They chased him down, pursued after the king, overtook him in the plains of Jericho. Jericho, right? Sits pretty much on the western side of the Jordan River there. And all his army were scattered from him, meaning he was what? He was alone. His army was not going to hang around if they could get out of this. So we're talking about the Babylonians, they took the king and brought him up to the king of Babylon, to Riblah, and they gave judgment upon him. Now, did I say Babylon? I meant Riblah, okay? Riblah is north of Jerusalem, okay? They said in the study lesson, I didn't know, but it's probably 300 miles. Can you imagine? well, we're going to take you to see the king, old Zedekiah. Now, it's just a short walk of about 300 miles, but that's what we're going to do. And we're going to let the king, he's going to cast judgment on you. What's he going to do? Well, the last thing you want to do before King Nebuchadnezzar, right, is be a bad guy, especially be against his army and his people. You remember King Nebuchadnezzar? Remember Daniel in the lion's den? Remember the 3 Hebrew children? They threw him in the fire. They threw Daniel in the lion's den. He didn't just like sit him out there and let the birds peck at him. He might have done that later. But King Nebuchadnezzar was not a friendly fellow. They took the king, brought him up to the king of Babylon, to Riblah, and they gave judgment upon him. Guess what? We mentioned this. Verse 7 says, they slew the sons of Zedekiah. What's that mean? Killed them before his very eyes. Now, you know, all this might sound terrible, but this is what God warned his people would happen if they disobeyed him. They slew the sons of Zedekiah before his eyes. They put out the eyes of Zedekiah. Now, I don't know how you do that. You know, nowadays I'll be careful what I say here. I'll get taken to jail. You know, like capital punishment. Now they make it so, all right, dude, you've only killed 6 people, raped half of them, and put them in a freezer, and ate 2 or 3 of them. We're going to give you capital punishment, but we don't want it to hurt. Well, that electric chair bothers me. That drug you give me gives me a tummy ache. I don't know how they put his eyes out, but this is King Nebuchadnezzar. I doubt they gave him a medication that made his eyes just gradually get blurry. I gather they poked his eyes out. Stick or, you know what? When they whipped Jesus, they didn't whip him with what? It was a cat o' 9 tails. It had bones engraved in the ends of it. So when they pulled it back what? Meat, blood. I don't think King Nebuchadnezzar, darn near, this would have been about 500 years before Christ, would have been any less merciful. Put out the eyes of Zedekiah, bound him with fetters of brass, carried into Babylon. They had to carry him because he couldn't see, right? I don't know how he got there, but they latched him in, I'm say handcuffs or whatever the fetters are, and took him back to Babylon. Get this. Verse 8. In the 5th month, this is what? This is just 1 month later. On the 7th day of the month, which is the 19th year of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, so he's been ruling there for 19 years, came Nebuzaradan, captain of the guard, a servant of the king of Babylon, Jerusalem. Okay, so King Nebuchadnezzar has a captain of the guard, right? He's probably like the war secretary in D.C. or something. I don't know. But he came to Jerusalem. And he had tasks to complete to bring Jerusalem to its final standing point. He burnt the house of the Lord, meaning what? This is the temple. This is Solomon's temple, the one he built. And the king's house, and all the houses of Jerusalem. And every great man's house burnt he with fire. Every great man means what? I'm assuming you have some kind of status, right? Whether if they're taking you away, leaving your house, why would it stand? Jerusalem was destroyed. By Nebuchadnezzar. Verse 10, all the armies, I've got 3 verses to read, and then we're going to be done here. And then you can celebrate. And all the army of the Chaldees that were with the captain of the guard break down the walls of Jerusalem around about. So there you go, Jim. Part of the job, if it didn't just burn down the inside, is they broke the walls down. This will no longer be a place where these Jews can rebel against me, says King Nebuchadnezzar. Okay? Verse 11. Now the rest of the people that were left in the city and the fugitives that fell away to the king of Babylon with the remnant of the multitude did Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, carry away. Anybody left? If we burn your house and we determine that you're worth something to the king over in Babylon, we're going to take you back again. All right? We're going to complete this exile and take you back. But verse 12 says, but the captain of the guard left of the poor of the land to be vine dressers and husbandmen. Why would he do that? Now, technically, they're the empire. I mean, they basically wiped out this little group of people that are serving God that they didn't think needed to exist anymore. But they sort of have an investment there, right, in time. So if you're a farmer or if you could work the orchards, right, they don't necessarily want you just to deteriorate into dust, right? They want you just to kind of keep doing your thing. Just keep taking care of the land, keep farming, keep growing grapes, whatever else you do. Left them there to do that. So this becomes the remnant. When we talk about the remnant of Jerusalem, this is them. These were the leftovers that Babylon left there and took everyone back. Sounds like a sad story, but it really is for 2 reasons, right? If you look at the details and we can try to visualize what's taking place here, it's just totally a massive destruction, right, of a city, of people in that city. Can you imagine this being on the news today? Almost. They didn't do it with hands. They just did it with, electrified or electronic equipment, right, to make that happen. So anyway, it sounds severe. It is severe. It is severe. It's a reflection of 2 things. First of all, God was very patient with his people, right? He's very patient with us to this day, right? But he's also a just God. So what he says will happen. And you know what? After many, many, many opportunities he gave his people, just listen and obey. Anytime you bring, just one example, false gods in to the city to be served, right, as opposed to him being what? Your one and only true God. God told them it had happened. He saved them from their enemies hundreds of times. Okay? Even if we go back to Bobby's lesson he's teaching on Wednesday, right? Gave them ample time to repent, right? But they failed. They failed continuously, as Judy said. As a result, the covenant curses fell on them. They became the target. Okay. But we did see last week, and on the happy side, right? from being God's people's side is God still loved his people, just like he does us today, right? For God so loved the world, right? He what? Gave his only begotten Son. A few weeks ago we read in Jeremiah, remember the Old Testament? I got excited about it, whether you did or not. And maybe I didn't do that good at teaching it, but Jeremiah said in the Old Testament, there is coming a new covenant. God said that you cannot fail. His name is Jesus. His name wasn't mentioned there in the scripture. But he sent Christ, right, to keep that covenant, to keep that promise for us today. We have, right, as people that are constantly failing him, failing to listen. So he means what he says, and in his name, in the name of Jesus, right? This history, as much as we read and talk about, this history is that important, right? So we can what? Reflect and just look back and say, what God says, he means. And what God says he'll do. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been written down, wouldn't have been recorded, it wouldn't have been carried from generation to generation in the Bible like it is today. So anyway, I think that's all I can exhaust you with today before I let you go. All right.